Anthony, give us the Wall Street view on this. Obviously, the stock's looking pretty good.
Yeah, well, just on a stock movement after the close, as part of the announcement, the company reaffirmed their full-year guidance. So I think that's part of the reaction. But, I also think that, there are a number of investors who, like your previous callers, think that Twitter can overhaul its user interface to improve it, to make it more engaging, to rejuvenate growth in users, to amp the monetization and reaccelerate it. And there's a view that, it's time for a fresh change in leadership. We'll see what the company says on its conference call in a half an hour, and we'll see how the stock trades tomorrow morning. But it's such a volatile leadership culture at Twitter, even going back to the early days. And if any one of your listeners has read Hatching Twitter, you can kind of just take away from that book that you have a history of change in terms of the leadership. And for me, I contrast that with something like Facebook, which admittedly is controlled and closely held by Mark, but you have a very stable leadership and a very strong and well clarified vision for the future of the company. So, it remains to be seen whether or not these management changes will have more of a detrimental impact on Twitter over time than a positive one.
I have read every word of that book, Hatching Twitter, by Nick Bilton. George Zachary was quoted in that book, and it reads, George, like a telenovela because there is so much drama. I mean, is it really like that on the inside at Twitter? Is it a soap opera?
It was from my very first experiences when it was Odeo and then it became Twitter. There was always volatility in the company. There was always volatility between the players in the company. But, I don't see the maliciousness that Nick ascribed to the players. There was the behavior.
You don't think Jack Dorsey was always gunning to come back as CEO? Because that's how
I think he probably had a desire to, but I don't think there was, the evilness that Nick pointed out. I think there was some passive-aggressive behavior, but I also think it was a bunch of people who didn't communicate well together, so they found a method to communicate, which was an indirect method, which, by the way, is also Twitter. I mean, they created a product which is identical to their method of communication, which is indirect.
Tim, from your experience at Yahoo, another company that has struggled, how difficult is it going to be to change that culture from the inside out?
Oh, it's enormously difficult. It's enormously difficult if you choose an internal candidate, and it's enormously difficult if you choose an external candidate. There's really, I said earlier, communication is absolutely the key, and just keep at it. But you need to have something to say as well. They have to first decide really what they're doing, what they want to be, and then the messaging can flow. But changing any culture is tough, and such a high-profile fishbowl, if you will, as Twitter and as Yahoo was and is. Multiply it times 100, 1,000.